this video, we're going to consider emotions and stress. Let's first consider the importance of emotions. Emotions help us navigate social situations, helping us to understand other people's intentions, experiences, and expectations. To take but one example, let's consider emojis and emoticons in written communication, particularly texting. If emotions were not important, text would not be seen as lacking in our ability to express meaning, nor would there be mistakes in understanding what people meant or misconstruing someone's intentions. The rise of emojis points to how nonverbal communication is significant and vital to both expression and meaning. Another human phenomenon, pareidolia, is a human tendency to see and interpret vague and random objects as both familiar and known. It describes a proclivity to make sense of the world around us. One example is seeing faces in everyday objects like the tray on the back of an airplane seat or an outlet on the wall. It speaks to and highlights the importance of facial cues. Seeing the Virgin Mary, for example, on a grilled cheese sandwich only appears if one is already inclined to see it. It's embedded in a social milieu, specifically a religious Catholic tradition. Someone without this situatedness would not see it this way. Another example of pareidolia is looking up to the space and the stars to make sense of it all, to make it meaningful. So seeing a rabbit on the moon, for example, is another instance of this tendency to see things as familiar. Now, this embeddedness in a social milieu is the context in which we're going to approach the topic of emotions. And we've learned about different theories of emotions, specifically the James Lange theory and the Cannon-Bard theory, which are both focused on identifying the proximal cause, that is, trying to discern the real cause of emotions, the first cause. But what if we abandon the project of discerning the material cause alone? That is, rather than trying to discern what comes first, what if instead we attempt to elucidate the complex network of significations that embody our experiences? How narrow is our understanding of causation if we only limit ourselves to the material one? Let's consider a clenched fist. We might gesture this way when we're angry. Now, to say that anger is caused by the activation of the amygdala is an attempt to cover over the role of perceiving a situation in such a way that one gets angry. We have to be looking a certain way to feel this way, to feel anger. Now, we can artificially stimulate the amygdala, and yes, anger would be reported by participants who have had their amygdala artificially stimulated, but this is not how anger arises in everyday life. We can also remove someone's amygdala and anger is no longer experienced. It's non-existent. But this too only shows that the physical material cause, the brain structure, is necessary but not sufficient. It's very artificial to separate expression from the experience. The amygdala, crucially, does not feel anger. This occurs in a body, in a person who is invested in their world. Emotions arise in a whole living body, inserted in a world, context, situation, a milieu, to borrow from Merleau-Ponty. Now, Merleau-Ponty draws on this example of a clenched fist, and he says, a fist is anger. I don't put my hand in a fist because I feel angry, as Cannon-Bard's theory would state, nor do I feel anger because my hand is in a fist, as James Lange would state. Expression, experience, and cognition are all crucial to emotion. It's not a matter of which one comes first. Now, we can get lost and lose sight of this if we're searching for the material cause and mistake this for the proximal one. What if instead we consider the final cause, the teleological one, the one that makes sense of all the other causes? And for this, we'll turn to Sartre. Sartre is another philosopher who calls attention to telos, or the final cause. Now, I want to draw on an example from your textbook. The author of your textbook has an interesting story about skydiving, and he roots his understanding of this in a study that did some MRI scans of people who engage in sensation-seeking behavior, and specifically those who get a sense of thrill from these experiences. And those MRI scans demonstrated a particular activation of the striatum and the prefrontal cortex circuit in novelty seekers and those who find those experiences to be rewarding. And as he reflects on this experience of refusing to skydive, he remarks that he didn't want to, but he adds a curious phrase here. He says his prefrontal cortex wouldn't let him. Now, we could understand this metaphorically, such as when someone says that their heart is broken, when they don't literally mean their anatomical heart, right, beating inside their chest. It hasn't broken into a million pieces, or their heart longs for someone. These are understood metaphorically, right? But let's consider the teleological consequences of these sayings. We, as a whole person, are not responsible for our decisions. Instead, it's showing that some piece of our anatomy, whether it's our heart or our brain, is responsible. Why does the author not take responsibility for his decision? Take note of how comfortable we are in relegating our agency, our choices to our brain. My brain made me do it. We know that the prefrontal cortex is involved in emotion, but notice how agency gets turned into something that the brain does. It's posited as being located in a brain structure. This is another instance of the creeping homunculus. So turning to Sartre, Sartre calls attention to how we are responsible for our emotions. Emotions can cover over our agency in situations. Sartre talks about a flight from something, right? As in the fight or the flight response. It's about an object. Take note of how it's flight from something. Not as if the object exists out there in itself, apart from the person to whom it appears. The object has a meaning. It is that from which one flees. So when one flies away from something, they've understood that something as that from which one should flee. So take note of the teleology here, the final cause, the for which. So when we're afraid, we don't necessarily have to be conscious of this in the sense of conscious awareness, nor when we're happy. We don't need to be consciously aware of this. We don't have to be able to identify the emotion that we're experiencing. Most often, emotions are unreflective. You do not have to be aware of this telos, and most of the time we're not. Now, Sartre remarks that most psychologists argue that emotion is, quote, set in motion by perception. That is how we perceive the world, sets in motion an emotion that we then experience. But then the emotion withdraws within itself, even to the point of a brain structure. And we can root this in with how the author of the textbook remarks on his brain preventing him from engaging in the skydiving activity. Sartre comes back and critiques these understandings and says, on the contrary, the emotion returns to the object at every moment and is fed there. So let's consider an example of this. When people say that they are consumed by fear, it is a flight from something. You can't forget the indissoluble unity between an affected, and that's with an A, affected, that is a subject with emotion, and an affected object too. The object has meaning. It's not a passive object out in the world. It exists experientially as something. Now, we saw this in the case studies we've looked at before with Virgil and sight. He couldn't see the objects because they were meaningless to him. They had no meaning for him. They did not experientially exist for him. They were not part of his world. He was not attuned to them, at least in the visual sense. And he was definitely attuned to them based on his other senses, but they did not visually exist for him as objects to behold with his eyes. Now, the same happened with Dr. P as well. He did not see parts of the world. They too did not exist for him. Now, we can also apply this understanding to emotion. A situation calls forth an intentional stance before the world. And it's not just with Virgil and Dr. P, but a reflection on what it means to be human. This is true for us as well, not just those who suffer lesions or damage. These case studies illustrate something fundamental about human beings. We are meaning makers. Which was likewise the case with pareidolia, which described an abiding attunement and focus on meaning. When we approach an object, we see it as one that makes sense to us, is meaningful to us. This human proclivity towards meaning is something fundamental about what it means to be a human person. So to return to Sartre's theory on emotions, Sartre remarks that, quote, emotion is a transformation of the world. Now, he often describes these transformations as a form of escape behavior. It's a way of avoiding some recognition about ourselves, of covering over something that we maybe don't want to acknowledge about ourselves. Now, one of his examples is Aesop's fables about the fox and the grapes. Now, in Aesop's fable, a fox approaches a vine with grapes hanging on the vines, and he looks at them with hungry eyes, as it were, right? They look delicious, they look sweet, and he tries to grab them, but he finds that they are just out of his reach. He can't grab a hold of them. Now, there are a lot of things that could happen here. The fox could become upset, the fox could become angry, right? But in the fable, the fox does a transformation. He reframes his understanding of the grapes. He transforms the meaning of the grapes from something that looked so delicious, right, so tasty, to reflecting on them as, they were too sour anyway. Notice how that transforms the situation from one in which they were something he had to have to something that, no big deal. He makes light of his failure here by deciding that they weren't tasty to begin with. Now, Sartre remarks on a crucial example, or a crucial understanding of this, and I think it ties in nicely with our neurobiological counterpoint to this. It's not the chemistry of the grapes that's changed. The fox's attitude has changed, right? The physical material aspects of the grapes have not transformed, but the fox's understanding of them has. Consider how this also aligns with Schachter-Singer's experiment, where adrenaline was injected into both groups, but they had very different experiences of their situation. So our emotions, in some ways, are strategies that we employ to avoid action, to avoid responsibility. Now, Sartre describes this as a fleeing from freedom. In short, Sartre describes how emotions alter our experience of the surrounding world, a world that is seized upon, grasped, understood meaningfully. It is our intentional stance before the world. So let me give you an example of this. Let's consider a situation in which you may have found yourselves in, or at least experienced someone else in this situation. Road rage. Now let's imagine you're driving and someone cuts you off. How do you respond to this situation? One way to take up this situation is to understand that other driver was in the wrong, right? They cut you off. You were proceeding along just fine. You were proceeding along this trajectory, and they came in and altered that trajectory, right? They cut you off, right? They were wrong, and you are right in your understanding of this situation. Your anger is justified. You're righteous in your anger. And the other person, you can escalate the situation pretty easily here, imaginatively, where the other person must be told how wrong they were. And the person experiencing the road rage could take up this situation in which the other person must be told how wrong they are, right? Whether with a verbal or a hand gesture that they might use to show how wrong the other person was in the situation. What might one be covering over here in experiencing road rage? One may fail to consider how one was maybe driving too quickly, or following too closely to the car in front of them, but at the very least one is covering over one's responsibility for intending and understanding this situation as one in which one gets angry at the person who cut them off. Cutting them off is itself a point of view, and understanding the situation as one in which one is righteous in their anger, one is righteous in their understanding of the situation, and the other person is wrong. None of these are objective facts about the situation, but descriptions of various ways of taking it up meaningfully. Now, that's one way of understanding that situation. There are definitely other ways of understanding this as well. If you understood the other person as, come on in, right? Maybe they have a more pressing situation. Maybe they are hurt and they're headed towards the hospital, right? And so they need to get there quickly. Absolutely, cut in front of me. Perhaps they're one of those drivers who wasn't paying attention to the construction warnings ahead and the lane was ending, right? Maybe they didn't see it. Come on in, right? There are other ways of taking up the situation. And it's important to understand here that we constitute the situation as one in which it calls for us to be angry or perfectly fine with what the other person did in this situation, the driver who came in front of us. Activation of the amygdala is correlated with the experience of anger, but all of this neurobiology happens in a living, breathing body, a body that sees, feels, hears, smells, and tastes. We perceive the world around us. And not only do we have a perceiving, sensing body, we're not locked in a sensory deprivation tank either, cut off from the world. Our senses are directed outward. It does not occur in a vacuum. So to isolate the amygdala alone as responsible, as for instance the cause of our anger or fear, is to cover over how we constitute a given situation. Now, it's not always a deliberate choice, nor is it within our immediate awareness, but it could become something we're aware of upon reflection. How have we understood a situation such that one gets angry? The amygdala no more decides to turn on or activate than a book decides to burn at 451 degrees Fahrenheit. Or to use another example, a woman's uterus deciding to menstruate every 30 days or thereabouts. There's no intention or decision within material causes. To more fully understand human experiences, we need to elucidate all of Aristotle's causes. To privilege one over the other does a disservice to the rest. If we consider all four as equiprimordial, we can better understand what it means to be human. To give you one more example, a chalice does not get made from silver alone. The material cause is not enough to understand this. So just like we've seen with Sachs's numerous case studies throughout the semester, out of the neurobiology is a world manifest in our experiences. So it's interesting to take note of how the limbic system forms this interesting inner ring, an inner circle. These structures are definitely crucial for emotions, but they don't tell the full story. To take a look at one of the proposed circuits here, we'll take a look at the Pepez circuit, which is a proposed model for understanding emotions. And I think it nicely captures how it's a circle. There's no beginning or end. All of these structures are interlinked. So to come full circle throughout the entire class here, we can go all the way back to the beginning when we first talked about localization, which focuses on a single component, and that neglects how it is embedded in the whole brain, right? So the Pepez circuit, which is a model of how the limbic system gives rise to emotions. The limbic system is integrated into the whole brain. The brain is part of a person, and that person is meaningfully involved in their world. So reductionism certainly has its place, but we can't lose sight of the whole. Looking closer, looking in depth at a single component is itself a way of looking, but to generalize to the entire phenomenon is a mistake. So if we take a look at, say, depression, is this considered to be caused by low levels of serotonin? Yes and no. It is materially, but serotonin is expressive of a certain understanding. It is this and much more. We don't want to lose sight of the whole person. We are much more than a bundle of neurons. Now, we saw this with the emergence of consciousness, where Chalmers discussed the hard problem of consciousness. We are not going to find it within a single neuron, nor within the whole brain. Consciousness emerges out of a person concernfully involved in the world. Now, the HPA axis is another crucial component to stress. This stands for the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal cortex. HPA axis. So the hypothalamus signals the pituitary, which is the hormone releaser, to release adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. So ACTH acts on the adrenal cortex, which signals the release of glucocorticoids, mainly cortisol, which is known as the stress hormone. Now, the hippocampus responds to this rise in glucocorticoids, and it sends a signal to the hypothalamus to stop signaling the pituitary, acting as a negative feedback loop. So the hypothalamus gets the signal from the hippocampus to shut it off. The pituitary no longer sends hormones to release adrenocorticotropoid hormones, so that turns off the stress response. However, with chronic stress and excessive elevated glucocorticoids, this can negatively impact the functioning of the hippocampus. One of those effects is that it's reduced in both size and volume, meaning that the hippocampus is ultimately less effective in shutting off this axis. The hippocampus is also involved in memory. And with smaller hippocampi, it means that we are less able to effectively use coping mechanisms to deal with these chronic stress situations. Cortisol also has negative impacts on immune system functioning. It interferes with our immune responses, rendering it overall less effective. So if you find yourself getting sick when you're stressed, this is part of that weakened immune response that is caused by those high levels of cortisol. Now, this all ties in with mood disorders as well. So high functioning of the APA axis is also implicated with individuals who suffer from mood disorders. And antidepressants that are given to those who suffer from these disorders have one of the mechanisms of actions is to help regulate the HPA axis. Now, one of the side effects is memory loss. It interferes with the functioning of the hippocampus. So the side effect is that we tend to lose some of our memories. That side effect is part of how all of these systems are interlinked and interconnected. If you start tinkering with one aspect, you start having implications in a wide range of aspects elsewhere. So it's very difficult to selectively target a specific function without implications or affecting other aspects of the brain.